You tell yourself that you want success, and over time that idea becomes so familiar that you stop questioning it completely. As if it was always yours, as if it came from within, when in reality it was shaped long before you were even aware of it. Everything around you reinforces it. The people you admire, the stories you hear, the examples that are constantly shown to you, all pointing in the same direction, suggesting that your value is something to be built, something to be earned, something to be proven through achievement. And so you begin to construct a version of yourself in the future. Someone more stable, more confident, more complete, someone who has finally reached a point where nothing needs to be questioned anymore. That version becomes your reference, and everything you do begins to revolve around it. Your decisions become structured, your time becomes optimized, your energy becomes directed toward becoming that person. But the more you move in that direction, the more subtle something becomes. A quiet tension that does not disappear even when you are making progress. Because if you observe carefully, the movement itself is not neutral. It is driven by something specific, something that goes beyond the idea of success. You are not simply moving toward improvement. You are moving toward validation, toward a point where your existence feels confirmed by something outside of you. And that is where the structure begins to reveal itself. Because validation is not something you can secure permanently. It depends on perception, on context, on people, on variables that are constantly changing. That means if your direction is built around it, your stability is always conditional. Every step forward carries uncertainty because it is not grounded in something that remains consistent. This is why the experience of chasing success often feels unstable even when everything appears to be working. There is always a sense that something is not fully resolved, that something still needs to be proven, that something is still missing. And that sense does not come from a lack of achievement. It comes from the nature of what you are trying to achieve. Because approval does not accumulate, it resets. Every time you receive it, it satisfies you briefly and then it disappears, leaving you in the same position again, needing more. That creates a loop, a pattern that continues without a clear endpoint. You move forward, you achieve, you feel temporary relief, and then the same pressure returns, pushing you to continue. From the outside, this looks like ambition, like growth, like discipline, but internally it functions as repetition, as a cycle that does not resolve itself. The reason this pattern is difficult to notice is because it is reinforced at every level. Society rewards it, people admire it, systems are built around it, and so it becomes normalized. You do not question it because it is everywhere. And anything that is everywhere begins to feel like truth. But if you step outside of it for a moment, even briefly, you begin to see the structure differently. You begin to notice how often your decisions are influenced by how they will be perceived, how often your goals align with what is recognized rather than what is meaningful, how often your sense of direction depends on comparison rather than clarity, and that observation changes the perspective, because it reveals that your movement is not as independent as it seems. It shows that your motivation is not purely internal, but shaped by something external that you have absorbed over time. Once that becomes visible, a different question emerges. Not what you are trying to achieve, but why you are trying to achieve it. And that question is more difficult, because it cannot be answered through logic alone. It requires you to observe your behavior directly, to notice patterns, to recognize repetition. You begin to see how certain outcomes affect you, how certain reactions influence your decisions, how certain expectations shape your direction. And in that process, something becomes clear. The need to prove something is present in almost everything you do. It appears in your goals, in your habits, in your way of thinking, in the way you evaluate yourself. And that need creates a specific kind of pressure, a pressure that does not disappear even when you succeed. Because success does not remove the need to prove, it only shifts it to a higher level. You achieve something, and immediately a new standard appears, something that now defines what is expected from you. That is why progress does not feel like completion, it feels like escalation. Each step forward raises the requirement for the next one, and so the cycle continues. This is not because you're doing something wrong, but because the structure itself is built that way. It is designed to continue, not to end. And if you do not recognize that, you will remain within it, moving forward without understanding why the movement never feels complete. The ancient philosophers observed this dynamic in a different context, but the principle remains the same. They understood that this endless Pursuit creates a form of dependency that is difficult to escape, because it feels like progress while quietly reinforcing the same internal pressure. And the more you stay inside this pattern, the harder it becomes to see that the direction itself is what needs to be questioned, not just the results it produces. And that recognition creates a separation, a small distance between you and the pattern itself. In that distance, something changes. Because now you are no longer fully inside the cycle, you are able to see it, and seeing it is different from being in it because it allows you to question it, not to reject it immediately, but to understand it, to see how it operates, to recognize its influence. And that understanding creates the possibility of a different kind of movement, one that is not driven by the same pressure. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to pause, to notice, to consider whether the direction you are following is actually yours. This does not happen instantly, and it is not always comfortable, because it removes the certainty that comes from following a predefined path. But it introduces something else, something more stable, a sense of clarity that does not depend on outcomes. You begin to see that your value is not something that needs to be confirmed externally, not something that increases or decreases based on perception, but something that exists independently of those factors. And that realization changes the foundation of your actions. Because if there's nothing to prove, the pressure to prove it disappears. What remains is not emptiness, but space. Space to act without the same urgency, without the same need to validate every step. In that space, your direction becomes quieter, less reactive, less dependent on external signals. It becomes more consistent, not because it is fixed, but because it is not constantly adjusting to something unstable. And in that consistency, something becomes clear. The cycle of chasing was never about achieving something real. It was about maintaining a belief that something was missing. Once that belief is no longer active, the need to chase changes. You may still act, still move, still create, but the underlying pressure is different. It is no longer about completing yourself. It is no longer about proving your worth. It is simply movement without the same dependency. And maybe that is the point where everything shifts. Not because you reached something, but because you stopped trying to reach something that was never there to begin with. And that realization does not add anything new. It removes something that was never necessary. The belief that your value depends on something outside of you. And once that belief is no longer driving you, everything else begins to reorganize around that clarity. Not through effort, but through understanding. Not through force, but through awareness. And maybe that is the truth you were avoiding, not because it was hidden, but because it requires you to stop chasing what you were taught to chase, and to see that the direction you were following was never as certain as it seemed.